when a young boy with bruises on his arms begged the school janitor to let him hide at the school overnight, pleading for help to escape from his abusive home. The janitor initially thought it might be a young child's imagination running wild, yet one thing he said shocked him to the core, revealing a dark truth, one that put the boy's life in unimaginable danger. This is a story of bravery, resilience, and the relentless fight for justice. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe the truth should always come to light, be sure to like and subscribe for more. Ethan was only 11 years old when he stepped into Braithwaite's school, a place that smelled faintly of floor polish, crayons, and the lingering warmth of children's laughter. But unlike most of his peers who bustled through the hallways with boisterous chatter, Ethan always seemed to walk with his shoulders hunched forward, as if he feared the very air around him. His eyes often darted around nervously, and when anyone asked him a question, he mumbled and looked at the floor. The teachers who encountered him during his first week of class noticed his painfully shy demeanor, but it was his bruises that drew their silent alarm. "Maybe he's just clumsy," Miss Porter remarked to her colleague, Mr. Evans, one afternoon after the students had filed out of the classroom. Yet there was a tension in her voice that suggested she knew, deep down, there was more to it than mere clumsiness. Bruises do happen to children, but the pattern and number of them on Ethan's arms seemed out of place. Mr. Evans, who had been teaching at Braithwaite's school for nearly a decade, nodded gravely and said, "I've seen him flinch whenever someone raises their hand too quickly near him. There's something going on." Braithwaite School itself was a sizable building with beige-painted walls that had been recently renovated. Bright posters encouraged students to aim high, dream big, and believe in themselves. Ethan often gazed at these messages as though they spoke of another world he couldn't quite enter. He would shuffle to class, avoid eye contact, and keep his responses brief. He didn't seem to have any close friends and tended to linger by the far edges of the lunch tables, quietly picking at his food. Despite repeated attempts by Miss Porter and Mr. Evans to talk to Ethan, they couldn't get more than a few words out of him. If they asked about his parents, he would turn pale, as if the question itself were an offense punishable by some unseen force. Then he would stammer, "I'm fine," and quickly change the subject. But the growing bruises that peppered his small arms and, occasionally, his neck betrayed that something more sinister lurked behind the child's silence. Days turned into weeks, and tension about Ethan's well-being rippled through the small community of Braithwaite School's staff. Mr. Langley, the school's janitor, was a tall, wiry man who spent most of his days maintaining the corridors and the grounds. He was kind in an unassuming way and had a habit of humming quietly to himself as he worked. He sometimes observed the children in passing, especially those who seemed troubled. It was after school one afternoon, when the hallways were nearly empty, that Mr. Langley encountered Ethan hovering by the gymnasium doors. "School's over, kid," Mr. Langley said gently, pausing with his mop in hand. "You waiting for someone?" Ethan's gaze darted from one end of the hall to the other. He looked so frightened that Mr. Langley took a step toward him, concerned that the boy might faint. Ethan swallowed hard and then whispered, Can I stay here tonight?" Mr. Langley nearly chuckled, thinking it was just a boy's imagination. Perhaps Ethan wanted to have a sleepover at school because he couldn't bear to do homework or face an early bedtime at home. But as soon as he saw the panic in Ethan's eyes, he realized the boy's fear was genuine. There was a desperation in that gaze, far beyond anything a child's imagination could conjure for mere fun. "Why would you want to stay here overnight?" Mr. Langley asked. Ethan's lower lip trembled. He lifted his arm slightly, revealing fresh, dark bruises that ran in a line down his forearm. "I can't go back," he said. "Ethan," Mr. Langley said slowly, his voice growing quiet, "who did that to you?" Ethan tried to speak, but no words came out. Tears pooled in the boy's eyes, and he seemed to shiver in the hallway, as though the secrets he held inside threatened to devour him. Then, in a trembling voice, he said something that made Mr. Langley's heart jolt. "They said they'd kill me if I told anyone." In that moment, Mr. Langley felt a chilling realization. The bruises were not a product of minor accidents, and this was no child crying wolf out of boredom or a desire for attention. This was something dark and terrifying, a genuine threat that no 11-year-old should ever have to face. From that second on, the school janitor's entire demeanor shifted from casual caretaker of the hallways to a silent sentinel, determined to figure out how to protect this vulnerable boy. He took Ethan to Mr. Evans and Miss Porter, who were still in the building, preparing lesson plans and tidying their classrooms. The moment they saw Ethan's tear-streaked face, Miss Porter knelt beside him, speaking softly. "Ethan, honey, what's going on?" Ethan looked at her, his lips quivering. He was too afraid to repeat the horrifying claim he had just made to Mr. Langley, so he only shook his head. Mr. Evans exchanged a troubled glance with Miss Porter, and then turned to Ethan with a gentler tone than usual. "Let's get you somewhere quiet. You look like you could use something to drink, maybe some water or juice. Come on, we'll go to the staff room." Ethan followed them hesitantly, and Mr. Langley brought up the rear, scanning the hallway as though he expected someone to leap out and drag Ethan away. The school might have been nearly empty, but the tension was tangible, pressing down on everyone who stepped into that corridor. They led Ethan to the staff room, which had a round wooden table in the center, a fridge packed with teachers' lunches, and a sofa that looked a bit worn but comfortable. Miss Porter rummaged around, found some juice, and poured him a cup. Ethan cupped it in his trembling hands, only sipping it in tiny gulps. Mr. Evans sat across from him. "Ethan," he said quietly, "whatever is going on, we want to help you. You understand that, right?" Ethan nodded. "Can you tell us who hurt you?" Mr. Evans asked carefully. A brief flicker of panic crossed Ethan's face, and he shook his head. He muttered, I can't." Mr. Langley remembered the boy's earlier words and cleared his throat. In a soft voice he said, He's afraid for his life." Miss Porter gasped softly, and she placed a comforting hand on Ethan's back. She didn't press him to say more. Instead, she said, "Ethan, you're safe here. No one can get to you at this moment. You can trust us." The boy's grip on the juice cup tightened, and a few droplets spilled over the rim onto his jeans. But he didn't even seem to notice. He was lost in silent fear. For a moment, the three adults in the room, Miss Porter, Mr. Evans, and Mr. Langley, exchanged glances, each trying to figure out how best to proceed. Reporting suspicions of abuse was a serious matter. They would need to involve a social worker or child protective services. But that process, as all of them knew, could be complicated if the child refused to name his abusers. Eventually, Miss Porter said in a gentle tone, "We're going to call a social worker, someone who can help you. Her name is Ms. Dalton, and she's very kind. She'll know what to do." Ethan said nothing. He merely stared into his juice, still trembling. Outside, the sky was beginning to darken into late afternoon. From the staff room windows, one could see the wide lawn of the schoolyard, with its flower beds and neatly trimmed hedges. The place looked so peaceful, so removed from the horrors Ethan hinted at. Yet even that peacefulness felt fragile now, as though something dark and dreadful was lurking just beyond, waiting to shatter the boy's last vestiges of safety. Mr. Evans took out his phone and dialed Ms. Dalton's number. She was known among the school's faculty as a dedicated social worker who specialized in cases of child welfare. He explained the situation briefly, his voice kept low so as not to agitate Ethan. Ms. Dalton, upon hearing even the slightest details about the bruises and the threat, insisted she would come over immediately. While they waited, Ms. Porter continued to soothe Ethan, urging him to drink his juice, telling him that everything would be fine. But Ethan would only glance up at her, forcing a nod that betrayed his uncertainty. Mr. Langley hovered by the doorway, still rattled by the words Ethan had spoken in the hallway. He was trying to be stoic for the boy's sake, but the memory of that quivering voice saying, "They said they'd kill me," kept replaying in his mind. Within half an hour, Ms. Dalton arrived. She was a woman in her 40s with short, curly hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple blouse and carried a small leather notebook. When she stepped into the staff room, the tension seemed to lift slightly, as though her presence offered a glimmer of hope. She knelt in front of Ethan and introduced herself. "Hi, Ethan. My name's Ms. Dalton. I'm here to help you, And I promise I'm going to do everything I can to keep you safe." Ethan managed a small nod. Still, he wouldn't speak. Ms. Dalton gave him a reassuring smile, then rose and turned to the teachers, asking them to fill her in. They told her about Ethan's bruises, his quiet demeanor, his request to stay at the school overnight, and the terrifying statement to Mr. Langley. She took notes meticulously, pausing from time to glance at Ethan. When they finished, she exhaled slowly and said, "I'll need to talk to him, of course, but if he's in danger at home, then we can't just send him back." At those words, Ethan looked up, relief flickering in his eyes. But then he sighed, as if he knew it wasn't so simple. The system, complicated as it was, might place him temporarily back with the very people who hurt him if there wasn't enough proof. Indeed, Ms. Dalton seemed to read his mind and continued, "I'm going to need to speak with his foster parents as soon as possible. I'll need to make an assessment. But I promise, if I find any evidence that Ethan's in real danger, we'll take immediate action." That was the first time Mr. Evans realized that Ethan was a foster child. Mr. Evans and Miss Porter exchanged troubled glances, for they both suspected that abuse within a foster home might be harder to detect or stop, especially if the foster parents were adept at hiding it. They spent the remainder of that evening trying to comfort Ethan, while Ms. Dalton made phone calls and arrangements. She concluded that the best course, legally, was to take Ethan home for the night but arrange a visit the following morning. At Ms. Porter's suggestion, Ms. Dalton agreed that Mr. Evans would drive Ethan home, just to keep an eye on him and to ensure he arrived safely. Ms. Dalton would follow them in her own car, planning to speak to the foster parents immediately. It was nearing dusk when they finally loaded into Mr. Evans' old sedan. Ethan sat in the back seat, quietly staring out the window. Ms. Dalton followed in her vehicle. The drive itself took them out of the city center and into a quieter neighborhood of small houses with well-kept lawns. The home of Marcus and Elaine Maxwell looked unremarkable at first glance, a two-story building with pale blue siding, trimmed hedges, and a small porch light illuminating the driveway. It exuded a calm suburban ambience that belied any sense of dread. When Mr. Evans parked outside, he felt a certain apprehension in his chest. The house looked too ordinary, too proper, to be the scene of what Ethan had described. But then again, appearances were often deceiving. He glanced in the rearview mirror to see Ethan's ashen face, and he knew that behind those neat curtains could lurk unimaginable cruelty. Ms. Dalton stepped out of her car and waited for Mr. Evans to join her. She knocked on the Maxwell's door, and after a moment, it swung open to reveal Elaine Maxwell. She was in her early 40s, well-dressed, her hair styled neatly. She wore a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. When she saw Ethan, her grin froze for a fraction of a second, just a flicker of tension that Ms. Dalton and Mr. Evans both noticed. Elaine gave a soft laugh. "Ethan, you're home late. We were worried about you." "Hello?" Ms. Dalton said, taking the lead. "I'm Ms. Dalton, a social worker. We'd like to talk to you and your husband, if possible." Elaine's expression became uncertain, but she stepped aside to allow them into the foyer. Marcus Maxwell appeared from the living room, wearing a crisp collared shirt and dark slacks. He eyed Ethan with a sharp, unreadable look before smiling politely at Ms. Dalton. "Marcus Maxwell," he introduced himself. "May I ask what this is about?" Mr. Evans noted how confident and composed Marcus seemed, an air of someone who was used to showing only what he wanted others to see. Ms. Dalton explained that there were concerns from the school about Ethan's well-being, adding that she was mandated to check in and ensure everything was fine. "Of course," Marcus said smoothly, gesturing for them all to sit in the living room. "We've been fostering Ethan for some time now. He's a quiet boy, but we've never had any trouble with him. We only want the best for him." Ethan sank onto the couch, as if trying to make himself invisible. Marcus sat beside him, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder, an attempt at a fatherly gesture that Mr. Evans found unsettling. Elaine took a seat across the room, her polite smile unwavering. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," Elaine remarked, looking at Ms. Dalton with practiced concern. "Ethan's always been an anxious child, and I'm sure he might have told some story. But Marcus and I are doing our best to help him feel safe." Ms. Dalton watched them carefully. "Do you mind if I ask about the bruises?" she asked, her tone calm but direct. "Ethan came to school with several on his arms." Marcus chuckled nervously, removing his hand from Ethan's shoulder. "Oh, that? He's clumsy, you see. Always bumping into things. Sometimes we'll find him with a scrape or bruise and he won't even remember how he got it." Ms. Dalton nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, children can be clumsy." She then turned to Ethan. "Ethan, would you like to tell me how you got those bruises?" Ethan barely managed to meet her eyes. He opened his mouth as though wanting to speak, but then Marcus's gaze slid over to him, cold, warning. The boy dropped his head, his voice a timid murmur. I fell. I guess." Mr. Evans felt a twist of helplessness in his stomach. He wanted to tell Ms. Dalton what Ethan had really said, but he knew the boy might clam up completely if he felt cornered. Instead, he tried to channel compassion, hoping Ms. Dalton had enough experience to see through the facade. For the next hour, Ms. Dalton asked various questions about Ethan's routine, the Maxwell household, discipline methods, and more. Marcus and Elaine answered everything smoothly, painting a picture of a disciplined yet caring environment. They offered Ms. Dalton and Mr. Evans some tea, kept their polite composure, and insisted that everything was fine. Ethan remained mostly silent, occasionally glancing at Mr. Evans for reassurance. Mr. Evans offered a small, encouraging smile whenever their eyes met. Finally, Ms. Dalton stood, thanked them for their time, and said she would be in touch. As they left, Mr. Evans noticed how Ethan's hand trembled slightly at his side. Elaine walked them to the door, smiling sweetly. Mr. Evans felt a chill run down his spine because beneath that smile, he could sense a coiled tension, as though the polite facade was just a moment away from cracking. Outside, Ms. Dalton and Mr. Evans paused near their cars. "I'm not convinced," Ms. Dalton admitted softly. "But I have to follow procedure. Without any direct evidence from Ethan himself, I can't pull him out of that home on the spot. I'll file a report, though. We can keep an eye on the situation, maybe do an unannounced visit next time. And if anything else happens, we'll have a record." Mr. Evans rubbed the back of his neck uneasily. "I just hope we're not leaving him in a dangerous place." Ms. Dalton's eyes reflected the same worry. "If he shows more bruises, if there's any sign of escalation, then Child Protective Services will intervene," she said. "For now, we just have to keep watch." Mr. Evans drove home that night with a heavy heart. He couldn't shake the feeling that they might have left Ethan in the lion's den. Yet, he also understood that the system sometimes needed more concrete proof than suspicious bruises and a boy's fearful demeanor. That knowledge didn't make him feel any better. The next day at Braithwaite's school, Ethan arrived with even more bruises. They were on his wrist now, deep purple marks that looked like the aftermath of someone grabbing him. His face was drawn and pale, his eyes bloodshot from crying or lack of sleep, possibly both. The moment Mr. Evans saw him, he felt a surge of urgency. "Ethan," he asked quietly, "what happened?" Ethan mumbled something about accidentally hurting himself during the night, but it was clear he was lying. Mr. Evans and Miss Porter immediately sought out Ms. Dalton. She came to the school again that very afternoon and took Ethan aside, gently encouraging him to speak. But Ethan repeated the same story, tears brimming in his eyes as he offered no real explanation for the bruises. Days passed, and yet more bruises appeared. This time, they were carefully hidden beneath long sleeves. Only when Mr. Evans noticed Ethan wincing as he lifted his arm did the teacher suspect more harm. Ethan flinched whenever someone touched him unexpectedly. He refused to change for Jim in front of the other boys, and if forced to do so, he would always hide in the corner. Ms. Dalton was brought into the loop time and again, but each time Ethan refused to openly accuse Marcus or Elaine Maxwell. The process to place him somewhere else was stalling without direct evidence, or a confession from the child. It was one bleak afternoon that Mr. Langley found Ethan lingering in the dimly lit hallway after school, much like before. But this time, Ethan seemed more desperate, tears running down his cheeks as he clutched his backpack to his chest. "Please," Ethan whispered, gazing up at the janitor with haunted eyes. "Please, can I just stay here tonight? I can sleep in the broom closet anywhere. I can't go back." Mr. Langley's heart clenched. He guided Ethan to the staff room again, found Mr. Evans and Miss Porter, and explained the situation. This time, Ethan sobbed openly. "I can't tell," he said, cradling his head in his hands. "They'll hurt me if I do." Ms. Dalton arrived once more and saw the boy's distress. She decided that she had enough reason to recommend a temporary removal from the Maxwell home. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft yet resolute, "we'll get you out for a while, okay? Just until we can figure out what's really going on." Ethan nodded, relief washing over his tear-streaked face. For a moment, he looked like any other child, grateful to be rescued from a nightmare. Ms. Dalton made the calls, and Child Protective Services was contacted. The Maxwell home was placed under scrutiny. That very evening, Ethan was removed from their custody and placed in a children's shelter, an emergency arrangement that would keep him away from potential harm until the investigation could proceed. For the first few days, Ethan seemed to relax in the shelter. He had his own small room, decorated with bright posters. The staff there were kind but overworked, juggling numerous cases. Some were runaways, others children of abuse or neglect. In the midst of this environment, Ethan withdrew again, perhaps overwhelmed by the realization that, even though he was away from the Maxwells, he wasn't truly free. He had no permanent home, no guarantee that he wouldn't be forced back into the very place that haunted his nightmares. The trauma weighed heavily on him. He barely slept, often waking with nightmares. He confided in no one, afraid that sharing his fears might only make things worse. Within a week, he ran away. The staff discovered his empty bed one morning, the sheets crumpled, and the windows slightly ajar. Panic ensued, phone calls were made, and Ms. Dalton was informed. Word spread quickly to Mr. Evans at Braithwaite's school. The next day, Mr. Evans went out after classes ended, combing the streets near the school, searching for the boy. He couldn't stand the thought of Ethan alone out there, terrified, possibly in danger, with no one to protect him. He searched alleyways, parks, under the old bridge where teenagers sometimes hung out. Hours passed, the sky dimmed, and Mr. Evans was about to give up for the night when he spotted a small figure curled up on a bench near an old bus stop. The figure was so still that Mr. Evans feared the worst, but when he approached, he saw the faint rise and fall of Ethan's shoulders, the small breath escaping in trembling intervals. "Ethan," Mr. Evans whispered, kneeling down beside him. "Thank goodness I found you." Ethan stirred, blinking in the flickering street lamp light. He was shivering. His clothes were dirty, his hair matted against his forehead. Tears welled up in his eyes the moment he recognized Mr. Evans. I couldn't stay there," he mumbled. Mr. Evans hesitated, gently placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come on, let's get you somewhere warm. You need a real meal, and then we'll figure out what to do." With that, he helped Ethan up and guided him to his car. The boy sank into the passenger seat, so exhausted that he could barely speak. The teacher took him to a small diner that was open late, bought him a warm meal, and sat across from him, watching him eat as though it was the first proper meal he'd had in days. That night Mr. Evans made a decision. He called Ms. Dalton and said, "He can't go back to the shelter. He's terrified. I'm volunteering to foster him, at least for now." Ms. Dalton paused on the other end of the line. "It's a big step, Mr. Evans. Are you sure you're ready for that responsibility?" Mr. Evans glanced at Ethan, who was dozing against the diner booth, the lines of stress on his face easing just a bit in sleep. Mr. Evans took a breath and said, "Yes. I want to protect him. Let me do this." And so it was arranged. After the proper paperwork was filed, Mr. Evans became Ethan's temporary foster guardian. He set up a small guest room in his modest apartment, bought new sheets and a comforter decorated with subtle patterns, hoping to give Ethan some semblance of comfort. The first night Ethan stayed there, he hardly spoke, but he sank into the bed as though it was the softest, safest place in the world. For the first time in a long while, Ethan felt a hint of stability. There was always dinner on the table, and though Mr. Evans wasn't wealthy, he made sure to provide nutritious meals. He helped Ethan with homework, read with him in the evenings, and gently tried to encourage him to talk about what had happened. But the boy still wouldn't speak about the details of his life with the Maxwells. The memories were too raw, the fear too overwhelming. In the weeks that followed, legal proceedings began against the Maxwells, triggered by multiple incidents of suspected abuse. Investigators interviewed teachers, staff, and neighbors. Ms. Dalton testified about the bruises, Ethan's pleas for help, and the suspicious behavior of Marcus and Elaine Maxwell during her visits. However, the Maxwells fought back with all their resources, hiring attorneys who painted Ethan as a troubled, deceitful child prone to inventing stories for attention. They cited his running away as proof of his instability. Ethan's greatest obstacle was his own fear. Though safe under Mr. Evans' roof, the thought of facing Marcus and Elaine in a courtroom was enough to make him quake with terror. Whenever Ms. Dalton or Mr. Evans asked if he would testify, Ethan went pale and shook his head vigorously. "I can't," he would say. "I can't talk about it. They'll come get me." No one could convince him otherwise. Weeks turned into months as the case slogged through the family courts. The Maxwells appeared calm and collected before the judge, insisting they loved Ethan and only ever disciplined him gently when needed. Their attorney presented them as respected members of the community who had taken in a child out of altruism, only to be repaid with baseless accusations. During this time, Ethan settled into a routine at Mr. Evans' apartment. Ms. Porter visited occasionally, bringing small gifts like puzzles or books she thought Ethan might enjoy. Mr. Langley stayed in touch, offering to help with any chores or errands. Yet beneath the veneer of this newfound stability, a deep fear persisted in Ethan's eyes. He understood that the outcome of the court hearings would determine whether he stayed with Mr. Evans or returned to the Maxwells. And without his testimony, the evidence might not be strong enough to keep him away from them. The tension reached a fever pitch when the Maxwells' attorney called into question the credibility of Braithwaite School's reports, suggesting that perhaps the staff had a vendetta against them or had misread Ethan's bruises. Even Ms. Dalton's concerns were dismissed as subjective interpretations. The judge, trying to remain impartial, showed signs of leaning towards returning Ethan to the Maxwell household unless more conclusive proof of abuse could be produced. As the hearing date approached for the final decision, Mr. Evans felt dread gnawing at him every time he looked at Ethan. He didn't want to push the boy too hard, but if Ethan didn't speak out in court, it seemed likely that the Maxwells would regain custody. The nightmares that haunted Ethan could become his permanent reality. One evening, while Mr. Evans was making dinner, Ethan lingered in the kitchen, watching him chop vegetables. After a long silence, Ethan asked quietly, What will happen if the judge sends me back?" Mr. Evans put down the knife and turned to the boy, his heart heavy. "We'll keep fighting, Ethan. But without your testimony, it's going to be really hard to prove what they did." Ethan's eyes glistened with tears. He tried to blink away. "I'm scared," he whispered. Mr. Evans crouched down beside him. "I know you are. What they did was terrible, but if you find the courage to speak up, you could stop them from ever hurting you again. You could stop them from hurting any other child who might be placed in their care." Ethan stared at the floor for a long time, silent. Finally, he nodded slowly, as though making a decision he had been putting off for far too long. When the court date arrived, the room was tense. Marcus and Elaine Maxwell sat with their attorney, their expressions calm, confident. Ms. Dalton, Ms. Porter, Mr. Langley, and Mr. Evans were there to show support for Ethan. The judge was a stern-looking woman with gray hair pulled back in a bun, and she wasted no time in calling the parties forward. The Maxwells' attorney argued that the child had run away from the shelter due to his own emotional issues and that the bruises were a result of simple childhood clumsiness. He pointed out that Ethan had never made an explicit accusation against Marcus or Elaine, and that there was no definitive proof. Ethan sat on a bench beside Mr. Evans, trembling. The judge looked at him kindly, noting his presence in the courtroom. "Ethan," she addressed him. "Would you like to say anything today? You're not required to, but your words could help me understand the situation better." For a moment, Ethan seemed rooted to the seat. He felt every gaze in the courtroom on him, a dizzying sense of scrutiny that made him want to bolt out the door. Then he remembered the endless nights of terror, the bruises that never seemed to fade, and the calm yet threatening voices of Marcus and Elaine telling him that if he ever told anyone, he would never see the light of day again. He closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and stood. He walked to the front, each step feeling like a monumental struggle. When he faced the judge, his voice was barely above a whisper. "They hurt me." Silence blanketed the courtroom. Marcus and Elaine exchanged startled glances. Their attorneys shifted uncomfortably. Ms. Dalton and the teachers watched Ethan with tears in their eyes. Mr. Evans gripped the edge of his seat, anxious for the boy to continue. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice trembling. Marcus and Elaine, they used to hit me. I tried to hide the bruises. They threatened me, told me they'd do worse if I ever told. I was afraid. I still am. But I can't go back there. Please don't send me back." His words came out in a rush, raw and full of pain. It was the confession that everyone had been waiting for, the direct accusation that might finally tip the scales of justice in his favor. Tears streamed down his cheeks. There was a single moment of stunned silence before the judge nodded solemnly. Marcus sprang to his feet, protesting. "He's lying!" Elaine's voice chimed in, outraged. "This is all some orchestrated story." Their attorney tried to calm them, but their reaction only served to undermine their polished facade. The judge called for order in the courtroom, banging a small block on the desk to quell the outburst. Ethan's trembling voice still echoed in that hushed space. "They hurt me." And that was enough. With Ms. Dalton's prior reports, the teacher's testimonies, and the obvious fear etched across Ethan's face, the judge decreed that Ethan would not be returning to the Maxwell household. The next steps were clear. A more thorough investigation would be launched, and in the meantime, Ethan would remain in Mr. Evans' care. That day, the Maxwell couple stormed out of the courtroom, clearly furious that their carefully crafted image had been shattered. Charges for child abuse were filed, and Ethan's case served as the bedrock for a more extensive legal process that would determine the extent of the Maxwells' guilt. Relief flooded the hearts of everyone who had worked so hard to protect Ethan. However, an undercurrent of fear remained. The Maxwells were not the type to back down easily, and the teachers worried that they might try something desperate. For a little while, though, calm prevailed. Ethan stayed with Mr. Evans, gradually healing from the trauma. He began to smile more, started to make friends at school, and even participated in a small art contest in Miss Porter's class. Just as they began to believe that the worst was behind them, the unimaginable happened. Late one night, roughly 2.5 weeks after Ethan's testimony, when the world outside was quiet and most people were asleep, the Maxwells broke into Mr. Evans' home. Ethan was jarred awake by the sound of a heavy crash. He bolted upright in his bed, heart pounding. He heard Mr. Evans shout in alarm from the living room. Then came a brief struggle, the sound of furniture being knocked over, and a thud. Ethan's door burst open, and in the faint glow of the hallway lamp, he saw the silhouette of Marcus Maxwell looming over him. Before Ethan could scream, Marcus clamped a hand over his mouth. Elaine appeared just behind her husband, eyes wild with a twisted combination of fear and rage. They dragged Ethan out of his bed, ignoring his muffled cries for help, ignoring his terrified attempts to break free. Mr. Evans, dazed from a hit to the head, stumbled after them, trying to stop them. But Elaine struck him across the face with something heavy, sending him crashing to the floor. Ethan's screams were muffled by Marcus's grip as they forced him into a car waiting outside. The engine roared to life. Tires screeched. Mr. Evans managed to stagger to the doorway just in time to see the red taillights disappearing into the night. He felt a wave of helplessness so profound that it nearly overwhelmed him. Then, with trembling hands, he called the authorities. From that point on, the quiet suburban night erupted into frantic activity. Police arrived, paramedics tended to Mr. Evans' injuries, and the hunt for the Maxwells began. Ms. Dalton was notified, and she rushed to the scene, tears in her eyes as she learned of Ethan's abduction. Mr. Langley and Ms. Porter also arrived, wearing fearful, sleepless expressions. They stood with Mr. Evans on the sidewalk, the amber glow of streetlights illuminating the fear etched into their faces. The Maxwells drove Ethan out of state, determined to hide him away. They kept him locked in a small bedroom in an unfamiliar house, an old rental property that Marcus's family owned. They continued to threaten him, telling him that no matter where he ran, they would find him. Each day that passed felt like an eternity for Ethan, who lost all sense of time in that cramped, musty room. Back in Braithwaite, local authorities scrambled for leads. They discovered that the Maxwells had a cousin who owned property a few hours away, and they coordinated with law enforcement in that region to track them down. The frantic search stretched across 4 days of pure agony for everyone who cared about Ethan. Mr. Evans barely slept, consumed by guilt and fear, convinced that he had failed to protect the boy who had finally begun to trust him. On the 4th day, investigators located the property. They descended on the place with the determination to bring Ethan home safely. Marcus, in a final act of desperation, threatened to harm Ethan if they tried to take him. But the authorities, working with the caution demanded by such a tense situation, closed in swiftly. They forced entry into the house, catching Marcus off guard. He tried to use Ethan as a shield to prevent them from closing in, but a swift strike from an agent knocked him to the ground, preventing him from doing further harm. Elaine was apprehended in the next room, shouting curses at the top of her lungs. Ethan was found trembling in the corner of the bedroom, tears streaming down his face. When they escorted him outside, he saw the sun for the first time in days, its brightness almost blinding him. He was ushered into an emergency vehicle, where Ms. Dalton, who had traveled to the scene, wrapped a blanket around him and whispered reassuring words. He was physically unharmed aside from bruises and the traumatizing shock of the ordeal. But the emotional wounds were deep, and they would take a long time to heal. The Maxwells were immediately taken into custody, and this time, with the kidnapping charges piled on top of the child abuse allegations, there was no chance they would be granted any leniency. They were whisked away, the final image Ethan had of them being their furious, defeated faces as they were led off in handcuffs by the authorities. Word of the kidnapping and rescue spread quickly throughout Braithwaite School. Students whispered about the dramatic events. Teachers shared emotional hugs in the break room, relieved that Ethan was safe but horrified that such a thing had happened. Mr. Evans stayed by Ethan's side in the hospital for the first 24 hours after the rescue, ensuring the boy received medical evaluations and psychological support. When Ethan was finally discharged, he went back to Mr. Evans' apartment. This time, additional security measures were put in place. The legal system now had more than enough proof to keep the Maxwells away. Marcus and Elaine faced multiple felony charges, and they were incarcerated. In the quiet aftermath, Ethan was left trembling, plagued by nightmares of the time he spent in that dark room, afraid that the Maxwells would somehow come back for him. But Mr. Evans promised him, repeatedly, "They're gone. They won't ever hurt you again." Therapy sessions followed. Ms. Dalton arranged for a counselor who specialized in helping traumatized children. At first, Ethan was hesitant to open up, but little by little, he began to share his nightmares, his guilt, and his lingering fear. The counselor guided him through coping strategies, encouraging him to draw pictures of his emotions and to write in a journal. Over time, Ethan found it easier to breathe, to realize that each new day was no longer an extension of his worst memories. Throughout this healing process, Mr. Evans remained steadfast, ensuring Ethan never felt alone. The quiet apartment that once felt too small now felt like a sanctuary, free of threats. As the weeks passed, Ms. Dalton approached Mr. Evans with the idea of formal adoption. She had witnessed how the two had formed a bond. She believed that Ethan needed a permanent home, a place of real stability and love. Mr. Evans took his time to consider the responsibility, but in his heart, the answer was clear. He didn't see Ethan as just another child, he saw him as family. With Ms. Dalton's help, he filed the adoption papers. A few legal hurdles needed to be cleared, But the process moved more smoothly than he expected, given the circumstances. The courts recognized the close relationship Mr. Evans had formed with Ethan, and they approved the adoption a short while later. The day the adoption was finalized, Ethan was too overwhelmed to speak. He gave Mr. Evans a letter he had written, in which he thanked him for saving his life. That letter, stained with a few tears, became one of Mr. Evans' most cherished possessions. Though the scars of Ethan's past did not vanish overnight, he found a measure of peace living under Mr. Evans' care. His nights were still sometimes haunted by dark dreams, but each time he woke up in a cold sweat, Mr. Evans would be there, gently guiding him back to the comfort of knowing he was safe. 1 month after the kidnapping, life had achieved a cautious equilibrium. Ethan was back in school, forging tentative friendships. Miss Porter and Mr. Langley noticed that he no longer flinched every time someone approached him. He laughed at jokes, participated in class, and once, Mr. Evans even caught him smiling brightly when he learned he had earned an A on a science project. That evening, Mr. Evans made a simple dinner of spaghetti and meatballs, and he and Ethan sat at the small wooden table in their apartment's kitchen. The sun was setting outside, casting a soft orange glow through the window. Ethan twirled his fork in the pasta, glancing up at the man he now called his father. "How was school today?" Mr. Evans asked, his voice warm and comforting. Ethan shrugged, a small smile on his lips. "It was good. We had an art contest in Miss Porter's class. She said I did a really nice job." Mr. Evans beamed with pride. "That's wonderful. You'll have to show me later." They ate quietly for a few moments, appreciating the gentle hum of life around them. The TV in the living room was muted, the volume low. A sense of calm, a stark contrast from the chaos of recent events, enveloped them both. At last, Mr. Evans spoke in a thoughtful tone. "You've been through so much, Ethan. I'm proud of you every day." Ethan gazed down at his plate, tears threatening to fill his eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. "Thank you, Dad," he said. It was the first time Ethan had ever called him that. It made Mr. Evans' heart swell with a mixture of love and sadness for what Ethan had endured. He reached out, ruffled the boy's hair gently, and then they returned to their meal, letting the moment settle in. Far away, in a place Ethan no longer had to fear, the Maxwells remained behind bars, facing the full weight of their crimes. With the final break from their grasp, Ethan finally had the chance to truly heal. And though the journey ahead was still long, complicated by memories of abuse and trauma, Ethan knew he would not be walking it alone. Around him stood a circle of steadfast supporters: Ms. Porter, Mr. Langley, Ms. Dalton, and foremost, Mr. Evans, his adoptive father. Together they formed the family Ethan had always deserved, proving that even in the darkest of circumstances, resilience, hope, and the relentless fight for justice could prevail. For months to come, Ethan's progress continued to astound and hearten those around him. He discovered interests and hobbies: drawing, reading mystery novels, even playing a bit of soccer in the school's field. He forged slow but genuine friendships with a few classmates who admired his quiet courage, sensing that there was something profound beneath his shy exterior. In therapy sessions, he talked about the nightmares less frequently and focused more on the small joys in his new life: having breakfast with Mr. Evans in the morning, visiting Ms. Porter during lunch breaks, or helping Mr. Langley plant flowers around the school courtyard when the weather was nice. Through it all, Mr. Evans watched the boy he had grown to love transform from a timid, fearful soul into a cautious yet hopeful child. He marveled at how Ethan found ways to smile in spite of everything. Late at night, Mr. Evans would sometimes reflect on the randomness of fate, how a chance meeting, a few suspicious bruises, and a quiet plea for help had set this entire series of events in motion. He understood more deeply than ever that the strongest bond could form from the most painful circumstances. While the legal system fully concluded its case against the Maxwells, Braithwaite School moved on with its regular schedules: sports days, talent shows, parent-teacher conferences, and the usual swirl of academic life. Yet no one who worked there could ever forget the lesson of Ethan's journey. He represented the thousands of children who suffer in silence, desperately needing someone to notice their bruises, both visible and hidden. The memory of that fateful night, the fear, the kidnapping, never left Ethan's mind entirely, nor did it fade from the thoughts of those who loved him. But it did transform over time, shifting from a fresh nightmare into a distant shadow, overshadowed by the present glow of safety and love. In many ways, that transformation became the cornerstone of Ethan's recovery. He learned that nightmares could be survived and overcome, and that trust, once shattered, could be pieced back together slowly, given the right care and kindness. For every small step forward Ethan took, like reaching out to a friend, handing in a well-researched assignment, or finally telling Mr. Evans he felt safe, the victory was monumental. And that sense of accomplishment radiated out into the world around him, touching the hearts of the teachers and social workers who had fought for him. In quiet, reflective moments, Ms. Dalton would recall her first visit to the Maxwell home, remembering how she had left with an uneasy feeling but hadn't been able to take immediate action. She sometimes felt guilt gnawing at her, but she found comfort in seeing how swiftly the system could respond once Ethan's truth came to light. She used this case as a testament to the importance of vigilance and listening to subtle cries for help. She advocated for changes in local policy, pushing for more thorough investigations when repeated signs of abuse surfaced, even if the child was too frightened to testify. Meanwhile, Ms. Porter found a renewed sense of purpose in her teaching. She introduced new lesson plans that included segments on emotional well-being and the importance of speaking up when something felt wrong. She also kept a closer eye on each student, quick to offer a sympathetic ear or an encouraging word if she sensed distress. Mr. Langley, in his unassuming way, remained a steady presence at Braithwaite's school. He took pride in maintaining the cleanliness and safety of the building, silently reminding himself that each cobweb he removed and each loose railing he tightened could make the school a place where no one slipped through the cracks unnoticed. Occasionally, he would see Ethan playing soccer or strolling the hallways, and he'd feel a surge of warmth, remembering the day the boy had pleaded to stay overnight. That one pivotal moment, which had cracked open a well of pain, ultimately led to Ethan's rescue and to justice being served. As for Ethan, he continued to piece together his sense of self and belonging. The Maxwell name no longer had power over him. He bore the official last name of Evans now, and with it came not just an identity, but a promise of stability. He still had nightmares from time to time, waking up with his heart pounding, but he always found Mr. Evans just a shout away, ready to comfort him with a fatherly hug and reassurance that he was safe. On particularly difficult days, Ethan would reflect on how close he had come to losing hope entirely, how he had run away from the shelter, how he had cowered in silence for so long, and how he had believed that no one could save him from the cruelty he had endured. But each time, he reminded himself that he had persevered. He had found his voice when it mattered most, looked his abusers in the eye, and spoken the words that would ultimately free him from their grasp. In the final stretch of the school year, Ethan's story became less about tragedy and more about courage. He was invited to a small awards ceremony hosted by the local community center, where children who overcame adversity were honored. The event wasn't large or particularly glamorous, but it was a meaningful recognition of resilience. Ms. Dalton nominated Ethan for the Youth Bravery Award, and though Ethan initially balked at standing in front of strangers, Mr. Evans gently encouraged him. "You don't have to do anything you're not comfortable with," Mr. Evans reassured him. "But you deserve to be recognized for your courage." Ethan thought about it for a day or two, then agreed. He stood on a small stage in the community center's main hall, the overhead lights a bit too bright, making him squint. He wore a simple collared shirt and khaki pants that Mr. Evans had helped him pick out. When the host called his name, Ethan stepped forward, heart pounding, and accepted a small plaque. He looked out at the modest audience, Miss Porter, Mr. Langley, Ms. Dalton, and Mr. Evans among them, and for a moment, he felt the weight of everything he'd survived. "Thank you," Ethan said into the microphone, his voice shaking slightly. I wouldn't have made it without all of you." A small round of applause followed. It wasn't the thunderous roar of a stadium, but it was enough to fill Ethan's heart to the brim. Each clap was a testament to the fact that he was seen, heard, and valued. No longer hidden in the shadow of cruelty, he stood in the light of acceptance, gratitude, and hope. After the ceremony, Miss Porter gave him a hug and ruffled his hair, while Mr. Langley said with a smile, "You're braver than you know, kid." Miss Dalton stood a little ways back, wiping a tear from her eye, reminding herself why she had chosen a career dedicated to helping children. And Mr. Evans wrapped an arm around Ethan's shoulders, steering him toward the refreshments table where cookies and juice were laid out. "Proud of you," was all Mr. Evans could say. But the warmth in his voice spoke volumes, and Ethan felt that pride, that sense of being wanted, reverberate within him. Some weeks later, back in the comfortable quiet of Mr. Evans' apartment, Ethan found himself studying at the kitchen table. He was writing an essay for Miss Porter's language arts class on a novel they had read in class, something about overcoming adversity and finding inner strength. As he paused to choose his words carefully, he realized that he understood these themes on a very personal level now. Overcoming adversity wasn't just a concept in a book, it had been his daily reality. He thought about how he would never again be the same boy who begged the school janitor to let him hide in a broom closet overnight. That child had been defined by fear and uncertainty. But the boy he was becoming, this new version of Ethan, was shaped by resilience, love, and the knowledge that there were people in the world who would stand up for him, no matter what. Time marched on. The leaves outside turned from green to gold, then fell away in the autumn breeze. With the seasons came new experiences for Ethan, carving pumpkins with Mr. Evans for Halloween, enjoying a quiet but joyful Thanksgiving meal with Miss Porter and Miss Dalton as guests, and eventually putting up a small, modest holiday tree in the living room of the apartment. Each festivity was a milestone, a small victory over the darkness of his past. Mr. Evans often marveled at how quickly Ethan was growing, not just physically but emotionally. Though the nightmares still struck every now and then, they became less frequent, and the terror they carried receded more swiftly. Ethan grew more confident in school, occasionally raising his hand in class to answer questions, participating in group projects, and even making a friend named Caleb, another boy who had once been very shy. When the next court date arrived, this time to finalize the adoption fully and to close out the Maxwell case, Ethan went without fear. He sat with Mr. Evans in the waiting area, calmly reading a book about space exploration. Marcus and Elaine Maxwell did not appear in person. They were represented by court-appointed attorneys who had little to say. The judge declared that Ethan was officially free of any obligations to his former foster parents, and that Mr. Evans was now his legal guardian in every sense of the word, with full parental rights. Ethan felt no need to look back at the pages of that grim chapter of his life. Instead, he closed the book he was reading, stood up, and followed Mr. Evans out of the courthouse into the crisp morning air, a gentle breeze carrying away the final vestiges of dread. In the months that followed, Ethan continued to see Ms. Dalton occasionally for check-ins, though it was more out of warmth and friendship than necessity. She saw how the once frightened boy had blossomed into a thoughtful, caring individual who was doing well in school and thriving in his newfound family. During one of their final sessions, Ethan presented her with a hand-drawn picture of a sun breaking through dark clouds, a simple but poignant metaphor for what he had experienced. She framed it on her office wall, a reminder of why her work mattered. Mr. Evans and Ethan often talked about the future. Ethan shyly confessed his dream of maybe becoming a teacher himself one day, someone who could understand and protect children who felt alone and voiceless, much as Mr. Evans had done for him. Mr. Evans encouraged him wholeheartedly, giving him small responsibilities in the classroom when possible, fostering that spark of compassion. Eventually, even the memory of the Maxwell name no longer sent chills down Ethan's spine. They remained in prison, and the likelihood of them ever posing a threat again was slim to none. Over time, they faded into a distant nightmare, replaced by the warmth of daily life, the aroma of pancakes in the morning, the hiss of Mr. Evans' coffee machine, the laughter shared at Braithwaite school events, and the comforting routine of bedtime stories or conversations about the next day's plans. At school, Ethan slowly became a role model for some of the younger kids, especially those who had trouble speaking up or fitting in. Without consciously realizing it, he offered them an empathetic ear, sometimes giving a reassuring pat on the back or a quiet word of support. Ms. Porter saw this and often gave Ethan a proud smile in passing, thinking about how far he had come since the day she first saw him, hunched over, trying to hide the bruises on his arms. One day, near the end of the school year, Mr. Langley found Ethan in the corridor by the gym, the very place they had first spoken about his bruises. This time, Ethan was helping Caleb pick up some scattered soccer balls and store them in a rolling cart. Mr. Langley paused, the memory of that fearful night rushing back. Yet now the hallway was bright with afternoon sunlight, and Ethan's posture was relaxed. "Hey there," Mr. Langley said with a small nod. "Need any help?" Ethan smiled. "We've got it, Mr. Langley. But thanks." The janitor grinned back, warmth in his eyes. He hummed softly as he continued down the hall, reflecting on the miraculous shift that had taken place in that child's life. Bravery, resilience, and justice had won. The boy who once begged to stay overnight in a broom closet was now just another student, a child who sometimes laughed too loudly at jokes, forgot his homework occasionally, and kicked a soccer ball around with his friends after class. In short, he was free to be a kid again. That night, Ethan and Mr. Evans once again shared dinner at their small wooden table. This time it was grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, simple, comforting food after a long day. The window was open, letting in a cool evening breeze that carried the scent of blooming flowers from the courtyard below. Mr. Evans looked at Ethan, noticing how peaceful he seemed. The boy was reading the label on the soup can, curious about the ingredients. No sign of fear, no overshadowing sense of doom. "Ethan," Mr. Evans said softly. Ethan glanced up. "Yeah?" Mr. Evans paused, searching for the right words. But all he could say was, "I'm proud of you." Ethan's eyes softened, and he set the can aside. "I'm proud of you too," he replied. "Thanks for everything." They shared a quiet moment of understanding, the kind that only those who have weathered a storm together can truly feel. In that moment, the weight of the past did not vanish, but it found its proper place in memory, behind them, no longer dictating their present or their future. They returned to their meal, the soft clinking of spoons and bowls punctuating the hush of a warm evening. A gentle peace rested upon them, a testament to all they had endured and overcome. Beyond the window, nightfall descended, but inside that small apartment, there was only light, soft, glowing, and steady, symbolizing a life rebuilt from the ruins of pain, fortified by love and the unwavering fight for justice. Thanks for listening to the end of the story. If you've made it this far, please drop us a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue doing what we love by making these heartwarming and emotional stories for you.